Putin's financial empire is crashing, and the ripple effect is about to destroy everything you thought you knew about global markets. September 13th wasn't just another policy announcement. It was a surrender. Russia's central bank, after clinging desperately to crushing 17% interest rates, made an emergency cut that has sent panic through every trading floor from Moscow to Wall Street. This wasn't strategy. This was pure, raw terror.
Taking further measures against Russia, the UK has banned any British entity from undertaking transactions with Russia's central bank, finance ministry, and wealth fund.
Behind closed doors, banking insiders are whispering the unthinkable. When the economy of Russia finally collapses, the shock will be felt in every corner of the world markets. But here's what should make your blood run cold. Putin knows he's powerless to stop what's coming. When the West imposed sanctions, Moscow believed it was clever. Spend big on defense, generate employment, make the economy appear to be healthy, and wage war. On paper, it worked. The economy is growing. The unemployment is low, and the production lines are full of tanks and missiles. However, this is what they fail to inform you. War economies are economic cancer. They use resources without producing anything of value. Each ruble that is used on artillery shells is a ruble that is not invested in factories, technology, and infrastructure that would create wealth in the future. The move by Russia to spend heavily on defense did result in short-term growth in 2023 and 2024, but it came at a brutal cost. Consumer prices began to rise as factories shifted production from cars and electronics to weapons. The supply chains were twisted into pretzels in an attempt to avoid sanctions. Central bank headed by Elvira Nabiullina attempted to combat this using the only weapon they possessed: interest rates. The bank progressively raised rates, reaching 17% by the end of 2023 to cool the overheating war-driven economy. Think about that number. In normal economies, a level above 5% is panic. The war economy is like a house ablaze, and raising interest is like trying to cool the house while the kitchen is burning. The higher the rates climbed, the more they strangled businesses already suffocating under sanctions. The less relief provided, the more prices spiraled out of control. The less they released, the more the prices went out of control. The central bank was trapped, and just as the spiral deepened, a sudden move in September revealed something far more unsettling. The moment when Russia's central bankers finally blinked. Hold on tight for the next wave of shocking revelation. But before that, do you think Putin's war economy is about to collapse? Drop your thoughts below and smash that like button if you think this gets worse. Between 12 and 13 September 2025, the Bank of Russia cut its key rate to 17%, a 100 basis point move. Officials said the decision reflected the slowing of the economy. Rustat's preliminary data showed Q1 2025 GDP grew just 1.4% year by year, while the bank noted that wage growth continued to outpace labor productivity, a combination that raises real stagflation risks. Whether the move was measured or panic is an interpretation, but the facts above are well documented. However, the truly frightening aspect is that wages are increasing at a higher rate than productivity. Russian employees are receiving higher wages to produce less. That is the traditional stagflation formula, the economic nightmare that ruined whole economies in the 1970s. The central bank attempted to portray this as a restrained reaction. However, reducing rates by 200 basis points in a single move? That's not measured. That's panic. And when central banks panic, it is usually because they have seen something far darker than weak data. The kind of revelation that makes you wonder what happens when the war chest itself has already vanished. This is where the billions lost in a night story comes in. In February 2022, Western countries not only imposed sanctions on Russia, they just caused 300 billion of Russia's state assets to have been frozen or immobilized in Western custody, roughly $300 billion in total, about 200 billion euros in Europe, much held in Euroclear. Not stolen, not spent, frozen in foreign banks, making other people indebted as Putin burns the cash in his war machine. The EU itself had frozen 200 billion euros of Russian central bank reserves, the majority of which were in Euroclear in Belgium. Now, imagine you are the leader of a nation in the middle of a war, and you wake up to realize that your decades-long emergency fund has disappeared from your balance sheet. It was money that was meant to be the insurance policy of Russia in the event of such a crisis. Those frozen assets are not numbers on a spreadsheet. They were debt measurements that Russia could have sold immediately to protect the ruble or finance government activities. Now, they're sitting in Europe vaults, as Russia burns its economy at a rate of 300 million per day. The foreign minister of Belgium cautions that the seizure of these assets will cause a horrible systemic shock to the euro. In Russia's case, the reserves are gone, and the real danger now shifts to something even more fragile: the banks that hold the nation's trust. Russian banking officials are conducting discussions behind closed doors that would scare the average citizen. According to sources that are near the banking industry, there is a plausible threat of a systemic banking crisis in the next 12 months. The ugly truth is that Russian banks are economic zombies. They are compelled to purchase government bonds that they are already aware that are risky. They lend to businesses that exist only on paper. They finance projects that make little economic sense but serve Putin's political agenda. And all the time pretending that everything is all right, too. Bad debt is accumulating on the balance sheets of Russian banks, and they have all the reason to be worried. Defaults are bound to happen when you are compelled to lend money to finance a war economy rather than productive business. The terrifying part? Bank runs do not give a warning. It begins with rumors on social media, goes viral, and before long, everybody is attempting to withdraw their life savings simultaneously. That pressure builds in silence, and the real sting comes when rising prices quietly strip away what little security people thought they had left. Inflation in Russia dropped to 8.10% in August 2025. The Kremlin would have you pay attention to that term, decreased. However, what they are not telling you is that 8.1% inflation at 17% interest rates means that their main economic weapon is no longer effective. Consider the impact of 8% inflation on the common Russians. When you had 1,000 rubles in January, you could only purchase what 920 rubles could have purchased 12 months ago. Your savings are melting like ice cream in summer, and unless your pay is increasing by more than 8% a year, you are in effect taking a pay cut every month. Official figures tell only half the story though. Russian companies reportedly spend between $10 and $30 billion annually on questionable middleman payments to evade sanctions. Those are the costs that are not reflected in the government statistics, but are reflected in grocery bills throughout Russia. The central bank continues to protect that the rate will average 18.8 to 19.6% this year, and then go down to 12 to 13% in 2026. Even their positive projections indicate the crushing of the cost of borrowing in the coming years. And that isn't just prolonged hardship. It's the setup for a spending spiral that makes Russia's war economy look like financial quicksand. In 2025 alone, the war economy of Russia is spending $145 billion, and the expenditure is increasing at a rapid pace. That is not sustainable mathematics. It is impossible to spend $145 billion each year, money the state does not truly have, without eventually exhausting financial tricks. The war economy trap operates as follows. Enormous defense expenditure generates employment and injects money into the economy, making everything appear to be healthy in the short term. It is popular among politicians since there is no unemployment and the factories are operating at full capacity. The only problem is that in this case, tanks and missiles do not produce future economic growth. They just consume resources. It is boring money to have a costly party and then boasting of the fun everybody is having. The bill is paid in the end, and the party is over. The production lines continue to produce artillery shells as the civilian sectors are starving for investment. This forms a two-speed economy in which defense contractors are drowning in cash, and normal businesses are unable to borrow at 17% interest rates. International sanctions cost Russians billions of dollars, and defense expenditures are still increasing. The real danger is that this reckless burn rate sends tremors through global markets that everyone will soon feel. Russia's economic meltdown does not stay confined within its borders. The disrupted supply chains and concealed costs of sanctions are directly transferred into the world prices of oil, metals, fertilizer, and grain, the components of all your smartphones and your dinner. Food prices skyrocket all over the world when Russian fertilizer exports are choked off. The cost of manufacturing increases when it is harder to trade Russian metals. Once Russian energy markets becomes unreliable, the volatility spreads through global energy prices like wildfire. The frozen asset crisis has its ripple effects. When nations are able to freeze the reserves of each other whenever there is a political disagreement, it compromises the whole system of international finance on which international trade relies. Critics caution that this may be a breach of international law and disrupt financial markets way beyond Russia. Russia is a producer of huge quantities of wheat, natural gas, nickel, and other products that enter into world supply chains. When the backbone of global supply chains turns shaky, the real question becomes what happens inside Russia itself when trust in its own system starts to crack. One reason that practically no one is discussing, yet might lead to the ultimate collapse, is trust in the whole financial system of Russia, not only by foreign investors, but even by common Russians. Interest rates are 17%. Consider what that means for ordinary people. Want to buy a house? Start a business? Buy anything of significance using your loan? You are looking at a cost of borrowing that would be criminal in most countries, that kills economic activity at the grassroots. Even the optimistic estimates of the central bank indicate that interest rates will remain at a recession-inducing level over the years. Once individuals lose trust in their currency, their banks, and the capacity of their government to control the economy, they make choices that bring about the very crisis that everybody dreads. They exchange rubles for dollars. They pull money out of banks. They cease making long-term investments, and when that trust crumbles, it becomes self-perpetuating until the whole system falls. The benchmark rate currently stands at 17%, but policymakers project it will average 18.8% to 19.6% in 2025. That is no temporary war footing. That is economic warfare with their own citizens, and it cannot be sustained. The Central Bank of Russia has just issued a huge flare signal that its economy is worse off than anyone thought. The rate cut of September 13th was not an economic policy. It was a white flag in the inflation battle. This is no longer the problem of Russia. When a large economy begins to crack, the ripple effects are felt directly on the global markets. Putin's economy is collapsing from the inside out. If this breakdown opened your eyes, hit that like button and drop a comment on where you think Russia crashes next. Subscribe because the story is just getting interesting.